All right, welcome everyone to this high-yield explainer. Go ahead and get settled in because today we are doing a deep dive into the very roots of cognitive psychology. Whether you're cramming for an exam on information processing or you just kind of want to know how your own brain actually works, you are definitely in the right place.
So I want to kick things off with a quote from William Pollard that just perfectly frames what we're talking about today. He said, "Information is a source of learning, but unless it is organized, processed, and available to the right people in a format for decision-making, it is a burden, not a benefit." And man, that just hits the nail on the head, right? That is exactly the massive puzzle early psychologists were trying to solve. I mean, think about the absolute avalanche of data hitting your brain every single second. How on earth does our mind organize all that so it's actually useful rather than just totally overwhelming us?
Okay, let's run through the syllabus for today. We're going to define cognition, check out the computational metaphor, look at early models of memory, specifically tackling decay versus interference, and then wrap up with a really important key takeaway.
All right, part 1, defining cognition. Let's get our basic academic terminology locked down.
Look, you simply cannot talk about cognitive psychology without bringing up Ulrich Neisser. Back in 1967, Neisser, who by the way is still considered a total giant in the field, defined cognition as the study of how people encode, structure, store, retrieve, use, or otherwise learn knowledge. So here's a quick mental flashcard for you. Cognition is way more than just passively absorbing facts and spitting them back out. It's a super active, really dynamic process of constantly structuring and utilizing what you know.
Moving right along to part 2, the computational metaphor. Let's look at how this whole field really got its start.
Now, to really understand these theories, we need to quickly look at the timeline. The whole information processing approach started bubbling up in the 1940s and 50s. And then by the 1960s, boom, memory research just exploded. It was this crazy, highly active boom era for cognitive psychology that led to some really comprehensive models of memory. And for our explainer today, that basically climaxes in 1965 when researchers Waugh and Norman dropped their incredibly groundbreaking model.
And their work brilliantly illustrates the core philosophy of that era. The absolute essence of the information processing approach is computational. Seriously, if you get an essay question on early cognitive models, this is your anchor. These early researchers looked at human thinking through the lens of early computers. They basically said, okay, the mind is the software, the programming, the processing rules, and the physical, squishy brain, that's the hardware. It was a total game changer. It literally revolutionized how we study human thought.
Which brings us perfectly to part 3, models of memory. Let's zoom in on those specific theories from that wild 1960s period.
Okay, grab your pens because you'll want to take some heavy notes here. Waugh and Norman's 1965 framework was the very first modern behavioral model to, well, travel down memory lane. And it's absolutely crucial because it basically became the ultimate launching pad for pretty much all modern memory theories that came after it.
So Waugh and Norman borrowed an older concept from the legendary psychologist William James and formalized what we call a dualistic theory. They argued that we have two totally distinct, independent memory systems. It's kind of like having separate boxes in your head. First, we have primary memory, or PM, which is your short-term storage. A really easy mnemonic to remember this is to think of PM as your present moment memory. Then we have secondary memory, or SM, which handles the longer-term stuff. Think of SM as your saved memories.
But here's where Waugh and Norman really leveled up. They did something William James never even tried. They actually quantified how primary memory works. They proposed that PM has a super limited capacity. I want you to picture a vertical file cabinet. Information goes into a slot. But once all those slots are totally full, any new piece of information coming in literally just displaces an old item. It pushes the old thought right out of the cabinet.
Which sets us up nicely for part 4, decay versus interference. Having a cool vertical file metaphor is great, but they actually had to prove scientifically how things fall out of that file.
So they posed this brilliant question that researchers had been arguing about for years. Is forgetting a function of decay, meaning memory just naturally fades as time passes? Or is it a function of interference, meaning new information actively kicks the old information out? Honestly, think about it for a second. When you forget a totally random phone number someone literally just told you, is it because too much time passed? Or is it because you started thinking about what you're going to have for lunch and that new thought pushed the numbers out?
To solve this mystery, they designed a really elegant experiment. First, they read lists of exactly 16 digits to their test subjects. Second, they varied the speed.
Sometimes they'd read slowly, just 1 digit per second, and sometimes they'd speed it way up to 4 digits per second. And finally, step 3, they measured exactly how much the subjects could actually recall. Now let's break down the logic here, because it's brilliant. There were 2 possible outcomes. If decay, just the simple ticking away of the clock, was causing the forgetting, then that slower rate of 1 digit per second should predictably result in much worse recall. Why? Because a slower rate takes longer, meaning there's more time for the memory to just naturally fade away. But if interference was the true culprit, the speed wouldn't matter at all. Fast or slow, they're still hearing exactly 16 items, which means there's the exact same amount of displacement or interference happening in that file cabinet. And the results were totally clear. They found that the rate of forgetting was strikingly similar for both speeds. And later experiments with different numbers of digits backed this up perfectly. Since the pure passage of time didn't change how much was forgotten, they proved that interference, not decay, is the much bigger factor in short-term forgetting. Definitely star this in your notes. It is new information actively shoving out the old information that causes you to forget in the short term. All right, let's wrap up this explainer with part 5, the key takeaway, so we can connect all this academic theory to our actual daily lives. So the most crucial thing to realize is that Waugh and Norman's model makes absolute sense in everyday life. Primary memory holds verbal information for verbatim recall. We've all been there, right? You completely zone out while a friend is talking, but when they suddenly stop and say, "Are you even listening?" you can somehow perfectly repeat the exact last 5 words they just said. No way you were actually paying attention, but you still got it. That is your primary memory at work. It holds onto that stuff perfectly, but only for a tiny temporary window. But here's the massive catch. While your recall is perfect for a few seconds in that primary memory vertical file, it is not going to last. Without you actively doing something, that info gets displaced by the very next thing that happens. If you actually want to remember it, rehearsal is absolutely required. Mentally repeating it, rehearsing it, that is the specific mechanism that saves the data from your limited primary memory and transfers it over to the permanent secondary memory for later access.
Which leaves us with a kind of fascinating question to think about as we log off today. If your primary memory is quite literally a vertical file with a strictly limited number of slots, what random everyday junk are you actively letting displace your most important thoughts today? Are you just jamming those precious slots full of distractions and scrolling, pushing out the exact things you actually need to remember? Just something to chew on as you study. Remember to actively rehearse what you need to retain, and I will see you guys next time.